Hi everyone, this week we will be looking at web-based learning objects. We will be discussing the definition of learning objects, the learning theories behind learning objects, and the strengths of learning objects as well as their limitations. So before we discuss learning theories associated with learning objects, we will look at the definition of these tools. Learning objects can be referred to as learning tools, web-based learning objects, or web-based learning tools. There is no single definition that is agreed upon by researchers for learning objects, but they do tend to have commonalities. Kobe et al. Defines learning objects as reusable chunks of materials or activities that constructs learning content. Kang Knack defined learning objects as interactive web-based tools that support the learning of specific content by enhancing, amplifying, and or guiding the cognitive practice or process of the learners. So most agree that learning objects are web-based tools and they are used for supporting learning through interaction between the tool and the learner. These tools are often self-contained, reusable, which also take advantage of visual, auditory, and interactive materials. So an example of a learning object is Codecademy. In Codecademy, learners use an interactive testing area to learn how to do basic computer codes. In this learning tool, learners mimic what learning objects are showing by using examples. So learners can make an account on this learning object and save their progress or even share their progress with others. There are many examples of learning objects that are found online for you to try, and I've given you a few examples. Looking at this learning object, we can see that it encapsulates the previous definitions that we discussed. However, there are commonalities between definitions and learning objects. There can be vast differences in the execution of the learning objects. So this is where learning theory of learning object comes into play. So we've looked at 4 learning theories in the past: behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and connectivism. Depending on the learning theory applied, learning objects can be very different from each other. Behaviorism looks at learning through consequences of action. Students are passive in their learning and learn through stimulus response patterns. Students will be motivated to learn by receiving rewards such as badges, achievements, trophies, grades, etc. And a learning object that makes use of behaviorism might have a lot of quizzes with grades associated to test what the students remembered. Cognitivism looks at learning through information processing. Students attend to and process information that changes the learner's schema or mental map of that information. A learning object that makes use of cognitivism might have interaction, questions that challenge an individual's schema, or opportunities for the learner to reflect. Constructivism looks at learning through construction of knowledge. Students are active in their own understanding of the world around them. Previous knowledge and understandings are challenged to stimulate growth within the student. A learning object that makes use of constructivism might have a problem that students have to solve or an opportunity to explore an event, use cause and effect trials to acquire new knowledge, like the volcano explorer pictured on the right of the slide. In the volcano explorer learning object, students will try to see what can be changed in order to increase or decrease a volcano's eruption. So essentially, they'll be creating their own volcanic eruption based on trial and error. Lastly, connectivism will look at learning as a social process where knowledge exists in the world. A learning object that makes use of connectivism might have opportunities to combine knowledge or sort through information. So some strengths of learning objects. The learning objects are reusable, so they can be reused in a variety of settings or courses. Objects can be interactive for the learning, allowing for active participation of the student, and this can increase the overall experience of the learning tool. Accessibility looks at the learning object's ability to be used on different devices, so that's depending on the language used. Flash, for example, does not work on iPads, but Flash is becoming outdated now anyway. Learning objects can also be made to meet different learning needs. So an example, it could accommodate for vision loss or hearing loss. And learning objects could also be accessed by individuals who are not in school to increase their knowledge and understanding of subjects. So the Codecademy example, I could use that and learn coding even though I'm not in school for computer technology. Learning objects can also be self-contained, so they can be used to teach a module in and itself. You don't need to provide additional resources or have prerequisites to the learning objects. Learning objects can be very engaging through the use of storylines, graphics, animations, or authentic problems. Learning objects have also been shown to be a great way to increase student understanding of a subject, and learning objects can be student directed and have the student have control over their own learning. However, there are some limitations to learning objects, and this could be that some learning objects may have little or no interaction from the student and may be very dull. Some learning objects may not remain up to date in the information and materials that they are providing, so the use of graphics can become rapidly dated in learning objects, which may deter students from engaging in them. And depending on the structure of the learning objects, some may not be very engaging. Information that is not realistic or information that students cannot transfer to their own learning may be uninspiring. Learning objects often need facilitation from a teacher to ensure that they can address questions for probing or deeper understandings. However, if this is not provided, the student may not get as much from that learning object as they could have. Information may also not be accurate or appropriate to the learner's level. It's important that there is a design team to create these learning objects to ensure that the information is accurate as well as appropriate to the grade level or cognitive level that the learner is at. And branching into that, the design aspect. So based on the learning theories presented, some may be more beneficial to use in different situations. The learner could have preference to one particular learning theory or receive greater benefits from one design to another. So some food for thought to think about when we talk about learning objects. Should learning objects be used as a method of teaching learners? Where does the teacher's role fit into learning objects? Can learning objects be considered as using synchronous or asynchronous learning? And can learning objects be used in different contexts? Is context important within the learning objects?